Hi guys, welcome to this tutorial. This tutorial we're going to focus on this leopard's eye. I have drawn out my eye and I've also included the line art for you guys as well, so if you don't fancy drawing your own out, you can download the line art, trace it out, use whatever paper you want, and then you can draw along as well. So the paper that I'm using for this is the Fabriano Artistico hot pressed watercolour paper in 140 pound weight. So it's quite thin, it's not the really thick stuff. It's my usual drawing paper, it's what I use for most of my wildlife and pet portraits. So it's one that I'm used to. And I would recommend that you guys use one that you are really comfortable and confident with. Just use whatever paper that you want to use. It doesn't really matter too much. If you want to use a better paper, if you only have sort of cheaper supplies, then I would recommend this paper, obviously, so the Fabriano Artistico. But if you don't want to purchase any additional supplies or anything for this, then just use whatever you have. So if you have some Bristol board, some Daler Rowney Bristol board, Winsor Newton Bristol board, anything like that would be perfectly fine for this. I would avoid using just ordinary plain printer paper or cartridge paper for this though. So I have already picked out a supplies list for you guys. So we're going to use 12 colours for this eye. So the colours that I've picked out are these ones. So we have dark sepia. That's mainly for the darker areas, obviously. We have warm grey one, cold grey one, Beaster, burnt ochre and earth green. All of those colours are the polychromos. Then we have two Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils, which are the white and the buff titanium. Now you can use any white pencil that you like. I mainly use my white pencil for burnishing and blending. Don't really use it for adding highlights, so that's mainly what I use that white pencil for. The buff titanium, you can use a polychromos equivalent. You can use ivory or cream. That's pretty much the same sort of colour as the buff titanium. You can see there that it's quite a creamy light colour. Then we have light yellow ochre, nougat and delft blue. Again, all of those ones are polychromos pencils. And then the final pencil is moss green from the Caran d'Ache Luminance. And you can use a polychromos equivalent. It's quite a dark sort of browny green. So just try and find one if you don't have a luminance pencil. Try and find one in your polychromos box or whatever pencils that you have that are similar to this. So I have the line art of this, and I will also scan in and give you this, guys, and I will give you this so you can match your colours to whatever kind of pencils that you have. So it's a really small supplies list because we're going to be mixing a few of these colours within the eye and the dark areas and the fur around the outside as well. So on top of that, what I have is my drawing broom. So this is just an old watercolour brush. It's a really nice fluffy one just to get rid of any eraser residue, anything that might be sitting on the paper that I don't actually want to brush away with my hand. If you brush stuff away with your hand constantly, then you are introducing oils to your paper, which can damage it. So you want to try and limit the amount that you actually touch your drawing paper if you plan to want to keep your artwork pristine for a very long time. So try to avoid touching your paper and brushing stuff away if you can. So I also have my embossing tool. So this is what I'm going to use for the whiskers on the top of the eye. So these long strands that you can see here, this is what I'm going to use. So this I purchased from Amazon and it is on the smallest end. We have I think it's a 0.6 or 0.5 mil tip, and on the other end is a 1 mil tip. What I will do, if you don't have one of these, I will leave a link of where you can actually buy it on Amazon. They're only cheap and you can get a whole pack for full of different sizes, so you can use them for different projects as well. But you can also just use a really sharp white pencil, or you can use something just to indent the paper. So you could actually use like the side of a pen, for instance, or if you was to take the innards out of a pen, you can use the side just to indent the paper. It's only going to be used for these small whiskers here. I also have a white gel pen, and I've just picked this out as a supply in precaution because in the eye here there is a very white highlight, and sometimes if I can't quite get it right with coloured pencils, then I will just go in with a gel pen, or I'll use some brush and pencil titanium white mixture. But just for ease of use for this tutorial, the gel pen is really cheap. Again, if you don't have one, it doesn't necessarily matter. You can just go over it with a white pencil if you can. But I will leave a link where you can buy the gel pen as well, in case you want to just purchase all the supplies that I'm using. So the eraser that I'm using is mainly going to be the Tombow Mono Zero eraser, but any old eraser will do. I will also most likely use my larger eraser. So at the moment I am using a, what is it? I can't remember what it is, but it's just an ordinary eraser. It's not my usual Caran d'Ache one. I think it's a Cretacolor one. It's just an ordinary eraser, just gets rid of the marks really nicely. I'm just trying to find it in my stack of pencils here. But it gets rid of the marks really nicely, and you're just going to need an ordinary eraser just to get rid of the graphite, just so it doesn't show through on your final piece. So finally, the sharpener that I'm using is the Coombe Automatic Long Point, but you can use whatever pencil sharpener you want as long as it can get you a really nice sharp tip to your pencil, because you're going to use your sharpener quite a lot to just keep your pencils nice and sharp. So I have two here because I use two different ones for my Polychromos and another one for my luminance. So the one with the tape on here is the one that I use for the luminance, just so the holes don't stretch in the sharpener. That's only the reason why I use two sharpeners. So I think that's pretty much all of the supplies that we're going to use. So what you want to do is keep your colour chart handy to the side of you so you can see which colours you need to use and which ones you need to keep out. I will also be providing for you guys some pencil pressures. So you'll hear me talk about pencil pressures and using light pressure or harder pressure throughout this tutorial, and that's one of the main features that you need to use to create this. So I will be providing a short video tutorial on the pressures as well as a scanned version of different pressures for you guys. So if you see me or hear me talk about light pressure and you're a little bit confused on how much pressure to use, then refer to those and then continue with the tutorial. So this is something extra that I'm adding into the tutorials to really help you guys get it right. So you have your reference photo, you have your line art, you have your pencils and all of your materials ready. I'm still trying to search for this eraser, I just cannot find it. So you've got everything ready and we're ready to begin the tutorial. So the first thing that we're going to do is obviously erase some of the outlines. So what I'd like to do is use my larger eraser. So I was right, it is a Cretacolor eraser. All I'm going to do is just very lightly brush over my paper just to erase those lines. So what you're doing is making sure that you don't erase them and push really hard onto the paper. You're just brushing over very lightly. You're just lightening up the sketch. So I've just gone over the eye there. So you can see if we use our drawing broom to just brush away those erasings, you can see how much lighter this is compared to the other areas. So all we're going to do is first of all take a sharp dark sepia pencil. So if you need to sharpen your pencil, do. You need to make sure that it's really nice and sharp. So I'm just going to give mine a little sharpen here. All we're going to do to begin with is go around the outside of the eye and map in all of those darkest parts. So I'm going to keep my colour chart at the side there, and I'm also going to use it to lean on. Again, I like to lean on something so I don't introduce a lot of oils from my hand to the paper, because I want to increase the longevity of the colours. So I would recommend that you lean on something as well, guys. So all we're going to do is look at the reference picture, and we're just going to gently, just using light pressure to begin with. So again, if you want to find out how to use light pressure, then just check out that little video or check out the little swatch which I've drawn for you guys. And we're just gently outlining the entire eye. So what I'm doing first is just going around the iris and mapping that in. So I'm making sure that as I'm doing this, I'm going quite slowly, and I'm making sure that I try and get it exactly the right shape, because that's the key to realism. You want to make sure that your bits and bobs are all the right shape. You want to make sure that everything's exactly 100% correct with the shapes and everything. So once I have done that, I can then go over with a slightly harder pressure and just increase the depth of the colour of this. So don't use hard pressure until you are completely happy with how the shape is on here. So you can see I'm just adding in a little few extra lines just to get the shape in. And then once I'm happy with this line, this is the line that I'm most concerned about. So you can see I'm just shading, just using the edge of my pencil just to try and get this correct. Then once I'm happy with it, then I can go in with a hard pressure, so you can see me build up this now. You can see the difference in the line this side compared to this side. This side's a lot darker. So then we can go in with nice harder pressure and block in that outer edge of the eye. So once we've done that, we can then go in and start to outline some of these areas underneath the eye. So you've got a few lines where you can see a little bit of highlight and things. So all we're going to do is gently outline those. So you've got this really light, reflective, highlighty bit here. So we're just going to gently outline that. It's a nice oval shape, so make a nice oval shape with your pencil. And then we're just going to follow this down. And then fill in the bottom of the eye here as well. So keeping everything nice and loose and sketchy for the time being. Just filling in all the different shapes. And blocking in all of these dark areas. So just shading with my pencil. So just adding in the darkest parts for now. Just filling in the bottom of this eye. Then we're coming up back to this highlight and just filling out this shape that we can see here. So if you need to adjust the reference photo so you can see some lighter and darker areas, then do that. It's often a lot easier to do that, to judge your values a lot easier. So if you find that your pencil is also losing a bit of its point, then resharpen it. I think mine is fine for the moment. So all I'm doing here is applying a little bit of a harder pressure once I've got that shape right to those darker areas. So you'll notice around the eye that there are some lighter darker areas and some darker areas. So all I'm doing is applying a harder pressure to those real dark areas, and then shading in the rest of the areas with my pencil with a little bit of a lighter pressure. So I'm going in with a light pressure now and just filling out this outer edge of the eye. So this bit that I'm shading now is one of the darker parts. So then once I've got that shape in correctly, I'm going over with harder pressure and really darkening that up. And then the lighter areas, I'm just adding a very, very light shading to fill in the colour. And that way I know where I need to add these lighter areas and blend out a little bit later. So this part of the tutorial is all about adding in your dark areas so we're just concentrating a lot of our time on getting this right. This is the focal point of this small portrait, so we want to make sure that we get it correct. Often you'll find with colour pencil that a little bit of planning like this, so spending a little bit of extra time planning out all of these darker areas, planning and taking your time, getting all of your shapes and everything right, you're going to pay off later because it's going to be so much easier. So just taking this little extra time to do this now will pay dividends later on. So just take your time. If you find yourself getting a little bit frustrated with it, or you find yourself thinking that you aren't progressing very far, just persevere with it. I guarantee that it will all start to come together in a little while. So don't rush your work. Never ever rush coloured pencil. It is a medium which requires a lot of patience, so just be patient with it, persevere with it, and you'll notice that by using light layers like we're doing, so building up the layers using light layers to begin with, you'll find it a lot easier to erase if you make any mistakes. So if you find yourself making a mistake, you can go in with an eraser and just gently erase, and then go back over and get it correct. Okay, so we're almost done on the outside of the eye. So what we need to do is go in and do the darkest parts within the eye. So we need to add the pupil and this dark shadow on top of the eye here. So what we're going to do is block in the shape of the pupil here. And then underneath this highlight, just block in those shapes. Once you're happy, again, add a light layer. Go in and add further layers and some harder pressure just to fill that in. So you've got your pupil in, so now we just need to add this shadow. So this shadow on top of the eye here comes right down to meet this highlight. So what we're going to do, this is where you'll also start to just slightly shape out your highlight as well, is just add in, using very, very light pressure, once more, just add in this top shadow here. So just make sure that you use the lightest pressure that you can with your pencil. So with your pencil pressures, it's really important that you understand how to use pressure and how to use them to apply the colour and build your layers and such, which is why I've started to include pencil pressure and that technique with tutorials, so you know exactly the right colour that you need to produce. Okay, so I'm happy with that. That's pretty much all of the darkish parts within the eye here. You've got a darker rim around the iris, but we'll come to that later. So, what we're going to do now is use a brown pencil. So we're going to pick up our nougat pencil. Again, make sure it's nice and sharp. And what we're going to do is put a layer of this nougat pencil over those dark sepia areas around the outside of the eye. So I'm going to make sure it's nice and sharp, so sharpen it up so you've got a nice sharp point. And then all we're going to do is just layer down some brown over the top of this. And this will help to burnish everything together. So you're just using light pressure, you're building up the layer, you're trying to get rid of this grain of the paper here. And this will also fill in nicely on those lighter areas. And then in a minute we're going to use our white pencil and we're going to burnish even further and then add a further layer of the dark sepia. We're also just going to add a layer of the nougat into this shadow area on the eye. So you can see as you're adding this over that it's smoothing out a lot of the colour. It's adding an extra layer. Everything is getting a lot darker, which is what we want. Okay, so now we're going to use our luminance white pencil. If you don't have the luminance white pencil, just any will be fine. Again, you want to make sure it's really nice and sharp, so there's going to be a lot of sharpening involved on this tutorial. So you take your nice sharp pencil, and what we're going to do is go over the lighter areas with this. So you've previously mapped out all the shapes of your lighter areas. They should still be visible. you shouldn't have used too hard a pressure on those lighter bits that you would have lost them. So what we're going to do is just go over. You can see that as you add the white pencil over, it starts to lighten it as well, which is what we want because we want those nice and light. And it will also start to burnish it out. So the pressure that I'm using with the pencil here is quite a light pressure. I'm not pushing too hard. It's difficult to show how to use a white pencil with pressure, obviously because the paper's white. So all I'm doing is just using my pencil. I'm using it as if I was writing. So I'm using the same sort of pressure as I would put on a pen to write on the paper. And just dragging it over those lighter, whiter areas. Until I'm happy with how they're looking. So you'll see as you've added that over that everything's sort of smoothed out and nice now. So now we need to add a further layer of the dark sepia to just knock everything back and really blend everything together. So take a nice sharp pencil once more, resharpen it if you need to. We're going to work over the darker areas, so those really dark areas where we haven't added the white is where we're going to add this first. And again, using light pressure, just gently shading over this area. You'll see that as you add this, it starts to create a nice and even darker area, which is exactly what we want. So you want to make sure that you go around this outer edge of the eye, get that real nice and dark in there. Up here as well, just all over those dark areas where we haven't added that white. And you'll see that just by adding a further layer of the dark sepia, again, you're burnishing everything together. You've got a really nice difference between the light areas and the darker areas at the moment. So with the lighter areas, what we're now going to do is go over with our dark sepia. So what we're going to do for this is just gently glaze this colour over. So we're going to use the side of the pencil and you're just going to go back and forth really quite quickly just to add a touch of colour over there. So the same with this bit down the bottom and on the inner corner here as well. So you're just glazing the colour over. If you feel like you've gone too dark, then you can go back over with your white pencil, or if there are particular areas that you feel need to be a little bit lighter, then just go back over with your white pencil until you're happy with how the contrast between those areas in the outside of the eye look. So I'm pretty happy with that. You'll notice that we haven't actually added any colour to this white bit here, and we want to leave it that way until we've done the inside of the eye here. So we're going to turn our attention to actually doing the inside of the eye now. So the base layers that we're going to use to begin with are some lighter colours. So what we're going to do, as this eye is quite creamy and yellow, it's got a nice green tinge to it as well, we're going to use our buff titanium. Again, if you don't have the luminance pencil, then just use an ivory pencil, or a really nice sort of really light yellow pencil would do as well. So you want to make sure that the pencil is nice and sharp, so give it a sharpen if you need to. Hopefully yours doesn't break in the pencil sharpener like mine has. So then all we're going to do is take our nice sharp pencil and we're just going to add a whole layer over this entire area, but avoiding the highlight. So if we start towards the left here, and as you're laying this colour down, what you want to do is use small circular motions. You can use large circular motions as well, but small circular motions like this will help you get into the tooth of the paper and apply the colour down really, really nicely. So you want to apply this pencil like this all over the area for the iris. You want to make sure that you also blend this pencil out towards those darker areas as well. But be careful not to drag the black into the dark, because it will create a muddy looking colour. So just be careful when you're dragging your pencil into those darker areas that you don't drag anything back into the lighter areas. So you want to go all the way up to the edge of this highlight. You want to just fill in the shape of that highlight as well. So again, you want to make sure that you try not to drag anything from the pupil down into your lighter area. So you can see that this is building up to be quite a nice colour. So once you've got one layer down, go over your entire area with a secondary layer of this. Just really helps to saturate the paper with those base layers. And just be really careful around the edge. So you can see as I'm going over, I've just slightly dragged it in. It doesn't really matter on the very, very rim there, but if you was to drag it straight into the middle here where you're going to have lots of light colours, then it probably would be a problem for you. It'd be really difficult to get that off there as well. So once you've done that, that's that colour done and out the way. We're then going to switch to our nice yellow colour. So we have the light yellow ochre from the Polychromos. So again, give it a nice sharpen. So with this one, you really want to make sure that you do use an extremely light pressure on your pencil. So we're going to add this pretty much to half of the iris. So what I'm going to do first is I'm looking at the reference photo and seeing where this green bit sits. So the green bit comes to the end of the left hand side of the highlight, and it creates a semicircle around the iris and ends halfway between the end of the right hand side of the highlight and the right hand side of the eye as well. So I've created a semicircle around that. So we're going to shade in this half of the eye. So we're using exactly the same motion with the pencil. We're making small circular motions, just filling in the tooth of the paper as much as possible. Make sure that you blow or dust away some excess pencil residue where necessary. Okay, so once you've got a nice consistent colour, what we're then going to do is then focus a lot of this pencil in those darker areas. So we want to focus a bit of this pencil in the top corners. So on the right hand corner, coming down around the edge of that darker bit, around the bottom of the eye, and in this top left corner as well. Then what we're going to do is use our white pencil. Again, make sure it's nice and sharp, and all we're going to do is do exactly the same motion over the entire area where we've added this yellow, and this is going to help burnish and blend everything out. And that will give us a nice smooth layer to add some colours back over the top. So now we're going to start to add some of the darker colours. So for that we're going to use the burnt ochre and the Beaster pencil from the Polychromos. So again, make sure they're really nice and sharp. And then what we're going to do is use the burnt ochre first, and we're going to add this where we've added that second layer of that yellow ochre colour. So we're going to add this into the corners up here. So again, we want to make sure that we use small circular motions. We're just adding the colour to those top sections first. So you really want to start to pay attention to your reference photo now and see where those darks and lights sit. So as you're doing this, you want to have your white pencil on hand just to knock back the colour, burnish a little bit more, and then reapply some more colour. It just helps to really blend everything out. You want everything to look really nice and smooth within the iris. You don't really want it grainy or liney, so you want to make sure that everything is really, really nice and smooth. So you just want to continually burnish and blend everything with your white pencil, just very, very lightly. You don't need to add any pressure, hardly at all, over this, just using very, very light pressure. And we're going to start to introduce some of this burnt ochre into some areas up here as well. So where you can see a few lines running through the eye, you've got a little bit of detail. We're also going to just add a little bit of the orange. I'm also going to add this around the green of the eye as well. So if you feel that you need to, then use your white pencil, knock it back a little bit. And then we're also going to use the Beaster to add a nice sort of browny tone along the bottom of the eye. So you can see you've got this weird sort of texture that looks a bit like stalagmites or stalactites, I can't remember which one's which, that comes out of the floor, but they're coming from the bottom towards the top. So what you want to do is add a nice layer of colour to begin with down the very edge and bottom of the eye, again using your circular motions. And then what you want to do is bring the colour up. So you want to create small sort of triangles coming up, so you get little small triangles of colour to try and create that detail at the bottom of the eye there. So on the right hand side here, you've got quite a dark mark coming across. So we want to add that in with the Beaster pencil now. So you just want to go back and forth, just add that in, and then shade underneath it until you've got your desired tone. You just want to build your colour with your Beaster until you're happy in certain areas. So in a minute we're going to switch to some nougat as well, so it's an even darker brown, and start to add some even more texture into this yellow section. Okay, so once you've done that, take your nougat pencil, so at the moment it's still looking quite unrealistic, but that will change when we start to add the green and we start to add the highlight as well and start to really refine it. So take your nougat pencil and you just want to follow where you've done these darker marks, start to really darken up some areas and shadows. So just constantly look at your reference picture, see where you need to add any texture, see where you need to add any darker areas. So it often helps to squint at your reference picture to see where those darker areas are and see which areas really pop out at you. So I would recommend squinting every now and then at your work and the reference photo and see if they match. And if they don't, then just take the steps that you need to get them to match. So add some darker areas, introduce some white to burnish or blend and create a little bit more of a whiter tone. Just do whatever you need to do to get that spot on. So at the moment I'm just adding some texture to the bottom of the eye, so just making those small triangles like I mentioned before. You'll notice that as you start to build the layers that it does become quite increasingly difficult to add more layers back over the top. So if you're finding it difficult, then just use a little bit of a harder pressure, but try not to push too hard that you can't actually add any more layers over. So you want to make sure that you try and preserve as much of the tooth of the paper as possible just by using light pressure, but if you need to, then just push hard to try and get that colour laid down. So at the moment I'm just adding the nougat pencil into those darker areas. And in a minute we're going to turn our attention to the green and it will sort of start to transform the entire eye and start to bring it to life. So I'm just going to blend out a little bit with my white pencil just to burnish everything together, knock it back a little bit, don't need it quite as dark as I've done it there, and that just blends everything out as well. So once you've done that, if you notice you need to add any more tones, any more yellow, any more orange, then just do that. Okay, so now we're going to start the green section. So we've already got our base layer of the buff titanium, so what we're going to do is just layer down our greens on top of this. So the first one, only two greens that I have are the earth green, which is more of like a bluey green from the Polychromos, And then we also have the moss green, which is a much darker, more vibrant green. So the majority of this is actually going to be with the earth green, and we're going to add a few accents and bits and bobs with the moss green. You'll notice around the pupil as well that there is a bit of an orange hue, and we're going to add that on top of the green. So you want to make sure we've got a nice sharp pencil. Might actually just need to grab a pencil extender for this one. As it's quite small. So, got my pencil extender. Give it a nice sharpen. And then all we're going to do, you want to make sure that you add this colour, but don't add it into the highlight area. So you want to use small circular motions like we were using before. You want to fill in this entire area up here. So also, around where you've added this yellow, you want to just introduce the green a little bit into that yellow area. So what you want to do is use your small circular motions and just gently come out into the yellow, and that will just help to blend everything together. So small circular motions, dragging out into the yellow, trying to blend it together. We're also going to add the yellow back into the rim of the green just to help blend it further. But you can see you've got a nice green colour going on there. So now we're going to add a further layer of the green. So using exactly the same motion, doing exactly the same thing. And then we're going to use our yellow, so we're going to use the light yellow ochre and work from the yellow back into the green. And as we do this, you'll see that it creates a natural rim, a darker rim around the edge, which is what we've got going on in the leopard's eye anyway, so that's great. So it's sort of taken a lot of the work out for us. You want to introduce the yellow as much as possible into the green, and then we're also going to use the yellow, and you're going to use quite a hard pressure to just add some yellow around the iris, around the pupil, sorry. And blend that out using a light pressure, just coming out from the pupil there. Okay. So taking your earth green once more, we're going to start to add in some of these darker areas in the green, so you can see some texture in there. So you're just going to use the point of your pencil and create these shapes that you can see on there. So if you need to, resharpen your pencil. It's vital that you have a sharp pencil to create these details here. Also, in a second we're going to switch colours and we're going to tone up and create a nice brown tone around the pupil. But for the moment we're just going around the outside and just adding in these little texture details. Like that. So with your moss green, we're going to add a little bit of this colour down. So again, you want to make sure it's really nice and sharp. And all we're going to do is use really light pressure, and we're going to add, just glaze over, so go back and forth using light pressure on your pencil. Just glaze over a little bit of this colour where you've got some of these darker areas. So just going to add a little bit of a pop of green. This colour was never intended to be the colour lay down on the eye. It's just an accent colour to glaze over. So you'll notice that this colour has a little bit more of a yellower hue rather than a bluer hue like the earth green does. Like so. So now what we need to do is tone up these browner areas that you can see in the green. So we're going to use our Beaster pencil for this to make sure it's nice and sharp. And we're going to use small circular motions. I'm going to try and match the colour that we've got going on the outside here. So you want to work into the pupil, so add this colour in the pupil and then drag it out just by using small circular motions. Really make sure that you blend this out so it fades out really nicely. So just gradually lift your pencil and really lighten the pressure as you're coming away. So also going to add this colour over these little dark blobbies that we've done. And then we're going to use our dark sepia pencil, again make sure it's nice and sharp, and just add in some real dark sections. So with this pencil you want to make sure you use really light pressure. We're going to reintroduce the dark sepia into the pupil here, make it really nice and dark, and you're just going to just gently darken up areas that need it. So if you notice any sort of green areas here that need a little bit more of a darker tone, then add that in. I'm going to use this to add the shadows that come into the green area around the highlight here as well. I'm also just going to add a further layer to the shadow up here. So add some shadows to the orange part of the eye down here. Really make sure that you get it as dark as necessary, as dark as it needs to be. Make any adjustments that you need to. Add any textures that you need to, just generally adjusting here and there, just adding shadows as you go. So I need to add a shadow that comes down the left hand side of this highlight. So just using very light pressure, just shading, going small circular motions back and forth. Just creating a nice shadow down the side of this eye here. If you need to, then just blend out with your white pencil as well. So what I'm doing here is just going in and just adjusting the shape that the highlight's making, whether you've got this shadow above the eye, so just adjusting that. You can see a little bit of green coming up into this shadow and shadow area above the eye here as well, so we're going to use the moss green and introduce a little bit of green in there. So you can see it's really starting to come together now. Got a really nice lovely eye going on. So we're going to continue to blend everything. So I'm going to use some buff titanium to actually blend this small green patch into the eye here and create a little bit of a lighter tone just around the very edge. So just adjusting my colours here and there, making everything a little bit more vibrant. Continually adjusting the shadows as well. Okay, so now we're going to do the highlights. So we're going to use our cold grey 1 and the Delft blue and the white for this. So I'm just going to pre-sharpen all of those pencils. So I've got my cold grey, it would help if the Delft blue didn't snap off in my sharpener as well. So we've got a Delft blue nice and sharp, and we're just going to use the white pencil as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is use our cold grey 1 to begin with, and what we're going to do is just gently shade this pretty much all over this white highlight. Then what we're going to do is use our green pencil. We need to just complete the structure of the bottom of the highlight here. So we're just going to use this pencil, make sure it's nice and sharp, and create a nice outline for the highlight. Need to get the shape right. And we're going to use this pencil to create some lines and some bits and pieces throughout the highlight as well. So just mapping out any shapes that we can see. Using light pressure to begin with, like we did previously, and then using a harder pressure to really put in those lines. I'm also just using a bit of the dark sepia as well, just to darken up some of these lines, trying to make it look as realistic as possible. So this is where your white pencil will come in handy as well. So if you accidentally fill in an area that you didn't mean to, you can go in with the white pencil and just create some nice white marks back in there. So this process is just basically mapping out the highlight and its structure. So just swapping between a few of the colours we've already used, mainly the dark sepia and the earth green. Just filling out the shape here. So once we've done that, once you've got the shape of your highlight correct, then we're just going to use Delft blue and add a little bit of blue directly over where the pupil is here. So very, very light shading, creating a nice blue tone. And then what we're going to do to lighten that up is use the white, and that makes a really nice sort of dusky blue shade. And then go back in with your pencils once more and just readjust the shape where you need to. And you can continue to add some Delft blue if you want as well, just to really make it a nice blue colour over there. Got some really nice colours going on. So just adding a little bit of blue to the very left hand side of the highlight as well. And just introducing a bit of the blue to the colour of the iris for a little bit of shadow there. So I'm also going to add this blue into this dark shadow above here. And I'm also going to add a little bit of blue onto these darker areas around the outside of the eye as well. It just helps to give it a little bit of an extra depth. Makes it pop a little bit more. And we're pretty much done with the eye. So you can see that now we've added the highlight, it looks really nice and glassy and glossy. If you want to, you can adjust any colours where you feel that you need to. So I could add a little bit more of an orange tone here and drag it into the green a little bit more. You can have a little play around with it until you're 100% happy with how it's looking. So just vary the pressures on your pencil, add multiple layers, try and get everything to where you want it to be. And then we will start the fur around the outside. So in this next part, what we're going to do is work on some of the fur around the outside of the eye. So we're going to work on the patches of fur directly around where we've previously done the eye. So underneath the eye and on top. And then we'll readjust some values and everything within the eye if we need to. And then we'll continue with the rest of the fur and then judge the overall piece. So to begin with, we're going to start how we did the previous part. So we're going to just gently erase some of this graphite. So just taking a larger eraser and gently brushing the eraser across your paper to try and lift up some of that graphite. So you don't want to erase too much, you don't want to erase too little either. So you want to just be able to see it when you're laying down colour. So I can just about see those marks, I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. So we're going to start our layering process for the fur. So we're going to use our warm grey one and our cold grey one. So again, we need to make sure that we have really sharp pencils. So make sure that you sharpen your cold and warm greys. So they've got a really super fine point on there. Just like these. And then what we're going to do is first of all lay down the warm grey one, and we're going to start on this section just here. And what I'm going to do is just hold the pencil quite far back and just shade in the direction that that fur is going in. So you'll notice on the reference photo that the fur is coming up. So that's the direction that we want to shade. So you want to move your pencil in that manner. Just reference your reference picture and make sure that your strokes and your shading are all going in the right direction. So as we come up and over the eye, you'll notice that the fur starts to come off in this direction. So it's coming towards the left hand side of the piece. So that's what we want to do with our pencil. when you're shading, when you're going back and forth, using very, very light pressure, you just want to angle your wrist or your pencil, whichever's most comfortable, or both if you prefer, and work in the direction that that fur is going in. So as you come up from the eye as well, you'll notice that the fur, instead of laying straight across, it starts to come up. So it comes up at like a 45-degree angle from the eye. And then as we come back around to this part, it goes up to pretty much vertically. So that's the kind of motion that you want to mimic with your shading. You just want to make sure that you're going with the direction that that fur is going in. If you was to go off at a bit of an odd angle, so perhaps on this one where it's laying pretty much horizontal, if you was to go vertical on this, it would look really, really unnatural, looked really contrived, and it wouldn't look realistic at all, because if you look at pictures of fur and animals, you don't often find that you have bits of fur going off at weird angles, unless perhaps they're wet, or maybe their fur is sticking up all over the place, perhaps they've got a bit of bedhead or something like that. You don't often find animals that actually look like that, so you want to try and keep in the same direction at all times. So as we come back around the bottom of the eye, we're doing exactly the same. You're following where that fur's going. Just look at your reference photo if you're unsure. Take a lot of time to study your reference photo if you're really unsure beforehand. The more confident you get with fur and how it lays and the anatomy of animals or whatever you're drawing, the more confident you'll get, and you won't have to reference your reference photo quite as much. But if you're new to it and you're a little unsure, then just continue to look at your reference photo as much as you need to. Don't feel as if you're not allowed to look at your reference photo at all. Always, always reference your reference photo. Even if it's just a quick glance or you need a longer look, just always make sure that you're looking at it and that you're getting the marks and the fur direction and everything in exactly the right place. So we've got a nice layer of the warm grey one down there. Covered a really substantial area of that. So what I'm doing now is just going over with a secondary layer in certain places where it needs a little bit of an extra coverage. Still following all of that fur direction. Like so. So then what we're going to do is pick up our cold grey one, and on the reference photo you'll notice that there are some cooler toned looking areas, and that's mainly around this side of the eye. So it comes up and around this area. You've got a little bit of a cold patch here and a little few cold patches around here. So the cold patches are identifiable by the sort of blue tone that you get when you look at it. So if you squint at your reference picture, you'll see that you have some warmer tones. So the more of the warmer tones are more noticeable in the darker areas where you've got this fur down here. But when you squint and look, you can see the difference between those warmer tones here and the cooler tones up and below the eye and just up here as well. So if you have a little squint at your reference picture, see where those cooler tones are, and then add down your cold grey one in those areas. So again, you want to make sure that you're using very, very light shading, following that fur direction. I'm going to add a nice layer of the cold grey one down. And on the bottom here, it doesn't really start until you get to this sort of area, sort of this patch. So I'm just going to add a very, very slight touch here just to start off the blending transition, like that. So these warmer toned fur areas are going to need a bit of a sort of creamy tone. So that's where our buff titanium is going to come in. So you can also use your ivory or cream if you don't have buff titanium. Just any really light, soft coloured, creamy looking pencil. So make sure that you sharpen it so it's got a nice sharp point. And then we're just going to lay this colour down in those areas where we didn't put down any of the cold grey one. So this is going to help blend everything together. Going to help to burnish and blend. So again, you're just using light pressure on your pencil, just going back and forth, following that fur direction. I just need to move these pencils out the way. So you're following the fur direction. Making sure that you blend into those darker areas as well. Okay, so it doesn't look too much different to just adding the one layer of the warm grey one, but you do have that subtle difference between those warm and cold areas. So now we're going to start to build up some of the fur strokes and tones within the fur. We're going to start here. So for this we're going to use two main colours, that's the burnt ochre and the Beaster pencil. So these are the same sorts, or the same colours that we've used within the eye here, so we're tying everything together by using the same colours in the fur. So what we're doing here is putting down our burnt ochre. We're putting this where we can see those darker marks, so just above the eye here, just above this pupil. And then as we come up towards this black spot or stripe. So at the moment we're just shading back and forth, just trying to get a nice little lay down of colour. Just trying to blend everything in as well. And just bringing some of this colour down here. We've got this really light bleached out area just by the eye right here. So we're just going to try and keep that free of any of the mid-tones for now. Just add down this, just avoiding that area. Then we're going to switch to the Beaster. Just go over these areas, especially where they're darker. But with this time, instead of just shading, we're also going to add a few fur strokes to try and get the illusion that that fur is really nice and soft. So you just want to use your pencil and make some very small lines and bring that into your base layer here. So we will blend this out in a second. So you just want to switch between these two pencils, just build up a nice sort of orange tone just here. You can also use that nice light yellow ochre colour, and you can glaze a little bit of that over to give the fur a little bit of a yellow tinge. It's also going to help to blend everything out as well. So you'll notice that there are also some darker brown marks, and that's where our nougat pencil is going to come in. And you can see these darker marks coming off of this eye area. So all we're going to do is add some really dark fur marks coming off of this eye section, going in the direction that the fur is going in. So on this bit here, the fur is coming this way, so it's coming off at this ever such a slight angle, and that's how we're going to add that fur coming off of this eye. Going to add it going in that direction. You can also use your dark sepia to get a really nice dark colour as well. So switch to dark sepia. You always want to make sure that your pencils are really sharp for this as well. So you'll notice that we haven't actually used any kind of black pencil or anything for any of this, and I don't tend to use a lot of black in my drawings. I like to try and create my own tone with dark sepia and a bunch of other colours, just try and get a nice rich tone rather than a flat one from the black. So we're just going to very, very lightly add a few fur lines over this. So bringing a few of these fur lines into this bleached patch of fur here. Just very, very lightly. And then on here you'll notice that I've got some markings here to depict where some of these really kind of dark eyelashes are. So to begin that, what we're going to do is start with our nougat. And we're going to follow the shapes that we can see that these eyelashes, or this eyelid area, is making. So just mapping everything out with the nougat to begin with, and then we're going to go over with the dark sepia, really darken everything up. I'm also just making some fur strokes with this, going off of this eyelid here. You can build up your cold grey one as well. You can really layer that and put a bit of pressure down on the pencil to get a nice grey tone come off of that. You can also blend it with the nougat to get a really nice grey brown tone too. So you'll notice that directly on the eye here it's quite orange, which has got some sort of orange eyelids, so just adding a little bit of that burnt ochre down. And then switching back to that nougat and adding in all of those hairs and things for the eyelid. So you can see I'm just mapping out some individual hairs. then I'm just going to go over them with the dark sepia pencil. Especially these really dark ones that you can see, there's just a few really dark ones. And then we're going to blend them out with some very light shading of the dark sepia on this area to get a nice really light grey tone. So you just want to use the colours and the pressures with your pencil to build up a nice tone. By doing it this way, you'll often find that you don't necessarily have to have a whole bunch of colours to work from. You can actually make and mix colours yourself just by layering your pencils in a certain way. It takes a little bit of practice, but it can be done. You just have to be patient with your drawing. And it will get there. So, just continuing with building up this fur. So on this sort of colder looking area, what I'm going to do is just push a little bit harder with the cold grey 1 to get in a few fur strokes there. I can also go over a little bit with some dark sepia just to add a little bit of a darker tone. Can always tone it down and blend it in by going over with the white or one of the lighter colours as well. So as we work our way around, you want to bring your fur strokes down and around. So this area here where you've got this line, I've left it off from earlier, that needs to be shaded with some dark sepia. It's going to be quite a nice grey tone. So just shading some dark sepia down, then we're going to blend it with the Caran d'Ache Luminance white pencil. And then we're just going to go back over with the dark sepia. And then blend it out once more. And then we're going to continue with doing the fur. So at the moment I'm using the nougat and just adding in some very faint fur lines. See, this bit might look quite white, but it's actually got quite a lot of grey and orange and other tones on it. It could also add a little bit of green in there. Just going to add a very small amount of green just there, just glazing it over, so just using the side of my pencil just to add a little hint of green there. And then we're going to turn our attention to the bottom half or the lower lid of the eye now. So for that, what we're going to do is use our yellow pencil to begin with. I'm just going to gently glaze a little bit of colour over this, so just give it a really quite a nice soft yellow hue. We can always blend it out if it goes too dark with the white, which I might do anyway, just to knock it back, soften it a little bit. So just adding this where we've got that darker tone, more sort of in this area here. I'm going to use the white pencil just to blend it out. So just blending that out ever so slightly. And then I'm going to go in with the nougat pencil. I'm going to add some of those brown fur lines. So I'm going to start with the inner corner of the eye here. Just need to resharpen it. You need to make sure that you have a super sharp pencil for this. So just adding in some fur lines, just building up the colour ever so slightly with the nougat pencil. Just bringing the pencil around this side as well, we've got some nice brown tones back here. And we're also going to use the dark sepia pencil just to add a little bit of dark tone to this here. So all I've done is just followed the reference photo, just added in those fur lines where I think they're going. And then we need to also add some darker lines coming off of this just to blend it into the surrounding area so it doesn't just look like it's stuck on there. You always need to make sure that you blend everything out. So for instance, this area just needs a little bit more work. And then we're going to add this dark patch in here with this dark sepia pencil. So all we're doing is just building up that fur. Going between the nougat and the dark sepia pencils just to try and add in as much fur detail around the eye as possible. In a minute what we're going to do, once we've done this little patch of fur here, what we're going to do is just readjust a few areas within the eye, just sharpen them up a little bit, give everything a little bit of added depth. And then we can continue with the rest of the fur around the outside, which is actually fairly easy. It might look quite daunting because it's like full of spots and everything, but it's actually a fairly easy rendering. So just making sure that I blend everything out. Adding these really, really dark lines around the bottom edge of the eye. So you can see that the eye sort of is starting to blend into the fur a little bit, and that's exactly what we want. So just on this edge here where this fur starts to meet this very first spot, we just need to add a little bit of orange. You can see a little bit of an orange tinge there. So you're just using the burnt ochre. And then remembering to blend that out into the rest of the fur as well. So you can really start to see this eye starting to take shape now. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to add a few fur lines down here. What we're going to do is then readjust the eye just a little tiny bit. So this bit here needs a little bit of shading on mine. Yours might be fine, just use your judgment. Make adjustments only where necessary and where you feel like it absolutely needs it. Don't make unnecessary changes. If you think it looks fine, then just leave it as it is. But if you need to make any changes or adjustments or anything, then make them. I always find that as I start to add more fur and colour around the outside, that everything in the eye tends to get a little bit lighter. So I just like to go in and just readjust it here and there. So that I get everything right. So make sure that all the contrasts and values are correct. I'm just ever so slightly adjusting the shape of the eye here. So as I've used light layers, I only need to use a little bit of pressure off white just to cover it up, and that's all I'm doing, just covering up this little bit. We're just using the white pencil, then I'm going to shade over with the nougat just to blend that in and adjust, then go back over with the dark sepia just to readjust that new shape of the eye there. So the rest of it I'm pretty happy with. Quite happy with the rest of that there. So this highlighted section here, what we're actually going to do with that now is just add a layer of cold grey 1. And there's a little bit of a blue tint to the very top edge of that. So what we're going to do is use our Delft blue and make a very, very small little spot there. And then just very lightly shade over the top section. It's just a very small detail, but it will make all the difference when we've completed our eye. So now what we can do is go in and do the rest of the fur. So what I'm going to do for this one is start on the top here and then do the bottom. So for the top we need to use our embossing tool or sharp white pencil or something to indent the paper to create these whiskers or eyebrows, whatever you want to call them. And this is where the Tombow eraser comes in as well. So with the Tombow eraser, I like to completely erase the whisker lines. Get rid of the eraser residue as well. And then with my smallest one, because this drawing is actually quite small, I like to then just use it the same way as I would use a pencil and indent the paper in one smooth line to create the whisker, flicking at the end so it tapers off at the end. So same with this one. It doesn't matter if you don't get them 100% correct, just in some sort of general position that they're in on the reference photo will be fine. So then with the thicker end, I like to make them a little bit thicker at the base of the hair. So just follow that channel or groove which I've created and go halfway along the whisker line to create a thicker base here, and then it gradually tapers off to get thinner. So then what we do, when we add colour back over, the colour will completely go over this, so it'll act like a bit of a resist. You won't get any colour go in that groove, and it will leave a nice shiny white line. So we need to get rid of some of the graphite up here, so again using our larger eraser and just brushing it over. Just like that. We're going to work on this small section first. And then we're going to put down our base layers. So the base layers again are going to be the warm grey one and the cold grey one. And we're going to add the warm grey one all over this in the direction that the fur is going in. So look at your reference photo, see which direction it's going in, make sure that you move your pencil to any position where it changes direction. So if it suddenly flicks up, as it seems to do the more you get around here, then just move your pencil and work it in that direction. So you'll see as we layer this down that it will avoid those embossed lines and we get some nice shiny white whiskers. So once you've put down the warm grey one down, we're going to go over with the cold grey one. Again, adding this to those colder areas. So if you need to refresh your mind on where they are, just squint at your reference picture. They'll pop out at you. They're quite blue toned. So add this colour, the cold grey one, to those areas of your drawing. Okay, so then we're going to use the buff titanium and we're going to add this to the warmer areas. This time, however, instead of going over the darker areas that we've mapped out, so you can see them because you can ever so slightly see the graphite lines showing through, we're going to avoid the really dark areas with this pencil, just add it around them. You don't have to worry about avoiding them completely. If you go ever so slightly in them, it's not going to matter. Just want to make sure that you don't add a large layer of colour down. Okay, so once you've got your base layers down, they look quite rough. Then we can start to fill in some colour. Now there's not actually much sort of the gingery tone left in this area, so all we need to do is give a little hint of it in some of the warmer areas with the yellow ochre, so on this side of the face where it's a little darker still. And again, we're going to blend this out with some of the white pencil as well, so don't worry if it's looking too yellow. But majority of this fur is going to be created just by using some fur lines with the Beaster pencil and the Nougat pencil. You can add a little bit of the burnt ochre to this yellow as well. I'm going to start to do some fur lines because there's some slight orange fur lines just flicked into this black spot here. So I'm going to try and flick those in there and then blend it out a little bit to the rest of the fur. Again, if we go too orange or we need to blend it any more, then we can just use the white pencil or any kind of light coloured pencil. So we're going to take the Nougat here and just build up a very light layer of these dark spots with the Nougat pencil. So just making sure we use a light layer to get the shape in. Then we're going to go over with the dark sepia. So I'm going to add all of the dark spots first in exactly the same way as that. So find where your dark spots are, add the Nougat down very, very lightly so you get the nice general shape of them, and then we're going to go over with that dark sepia. And then we can add some fur strokes to the lighter areas of the fur as well. So spend some time mapping out these areas. Don't rush yourself. Okay, and then this last patch here. So you just want to make sure that you get these spots spot on. Okay, so once you've done that, you can go over with your dark sepia and start to fill those in. So with these ones down here, what we've got is some overlapping orange fur. So what we're going to do is just use our dark sepia and we're going to make small lines coming into that orange fur so it looks like it's slightly segmented. So you want to work backwards into the fur rather than going forwards into the fur. And then as we come up, you can shake this in. And then as we get towards the outer edges of the fur once more, you can start to flick the black fur, or the black spotted fur, into the surrounding areas. So instead of working down into the fur to try and get this orange fur to look as if it's segmented in here, you work in the other way. So you work back, going in the direction that the fur is going in, not backwards, if that makes sense. So you'll notice that your spots tend to blend into one another, into the surrounding fur, rather than just being a stuck-on shape. Everything, all the fur strokes and everything are all blended out, so you just want to make sure that everything is nice and blended. You don't have any harsh edges. You want to keep everything nice and soft. You want to keep the realistic look of the fur going. So this is where a sharp pencil comes in really handy as well, because then you can get some really fine lines on this section here. So then we can make them appear a lot more orange just by shading over the very tips of them where it meets that black fur. It's obviously a lot darker. And then using your nougat pencil you can create some lighter lines and bring them even further down into the fur, just to blend it out a little bit more. So using the same technique, coming down the fur, you can blend it all together and get a really nice furry look. To make it even darker, what you can do is add a little bit of Delft blue in there. So give it a little bit more of a character, a bit more vibrancy in there. And then go back over with your dark sepia once more, again making sure you use those fur lines to really mimic the softness and the texture of the fur. I'm going to get it nice and dark. Like so. So you want to do exactly the same as that in each of these spots. So what you want to do is make sure that you bring your pencil stroke backwards into the fur and then upwards into the fur as well. And make sure you blend it out with your nougat pencil too. So you just want to make sure that you work over multiple areas. So keep going over with your pencils until you're happy. If you're using light layers, you can always go in with a white pencil to lighten everything up, remember? So if you need to, you can sharpen up your white pencil. Get a really nice, super sharp point. And then go in and really highlight a few key areas if you need to. You can also use the white pencil to drag some white fur back into your dark fur. Very, very lightly. Make it look nice and soft. So again, you want to make sure, if you need to give it a little bit of extra depth, you can add some blue. Go back over with your dark sepia. Just helps to give it a little bit more of a impact. So remember, coming down into your fur, blending it into the rest of the fur as well, don't forget. Remember to always sharpen your pencil, so if you feel like it's getting a little bit blunt, then just give it a quick sharpen. So the fur's really starting to come on now. It does take quite a while to fill in all of these spots and get it right, but it's a really easy process. It's really quite nice to render. It doesn't take a lot of thinking about either. You can just sort of map out your shapes and then get on and do the darker areas. I always find working on this kind of fur and doing this sort of technique really quite therapeutic. Just remember that you always need to blend your fur out and create fur lines in the light coloured fur as well. You don't just want to leave it naked. Got to add a bit of texture to the whole areas. Otherwise it's just going to look like all of your spots of your leopard are just stuck on, when in fact they're not. It's all nice and smoothly blended out. So the last couple spots now. So you can see the fur's starting to really take shape. It's looking really nice and fluffy. Got quite a lot of form going on as well. So just blending everything out now, making sure that I add some texture to the lighter areas. So I'm just using that nougat pencil to add that texture. And a little bit of the dark sepia as well, just to add a few spots here and there. So I'm just going to switch to the cold grey one and add a few lines with some hard pressure of that cold grey one, just to try and get in some darker grey tone, and interlace that with some dark sepia as well, just very, very lightly. Until I'm happy with how that clump of fur is looking. So I'm quite happy with that. I can just adjust it here and there, add any white hairs if I need to with the white pencil, so you can introduce some white hairs coming back over this dark fur so it looks even more fluffy. It looks a little bit more natural like that. So with this you need to make sure you've got a nice sharp white pencil, like so. So you have to push quite hard when you're doing that as well. So what we can do next is move on to the other areas of fur. So we can move on to doing this corner here. This is a relatively easy corner, just a few spots there. Most of it's sort of this nice golden colour as well, so we get to introduce a few more of the burnt ochre, nougat and bista colours. So that's the bit that we're going to do next.